You can just switch that out with the fan, I guess.
Okay. Setting it up right now. All right. I think we are live. Oh, hi, everybody. Want to welcome you all tonight to our latest installment of the Rev War Revelry series. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on Benedict Arnold's raid along the James River in the winter of 1781. And tonight, we have joining us two Virginia historians, Mark Wilcox and John Pagano. I'm going to give you both the opportunity to give us a little bio, who you are, what you do, how are you kind of tied into the story of Arnold's raid. Let's start with Mark.
All right. Well, yeah, my name's Mark Wilcox, and I'm an interpretive ranger for Richmond National Battlefield Park. And I'm also part of the emerging Revolutionary War era. And we're very fortunate in Richmond that part of Arnold's raid occurred on our property, on our park property, Chimborazo Medical Museum. And we do offer just a commemorative type of event in January. We've done that, I think, for the last 5 years or so. And where we'll have living historians, we do firing demos, we have colonial craftspeople out there. And it's an awesome event because it's so many great neighbors in the Chimborazo area who will come by using the park for recreational purposes. And then people really come from all over the city. We had several hundred this past January just come by and just check out what we're doing. I know our mission is the Civil War as it occurred in the Richmond area, but this is the one chance that we can interpret 18th century Richmond history. So just really happy to be a part of this tonight, Billy.
Thank you. John?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm John Pagano, and I'm the historic site supervisor at Henricus Historical Park in Chesterfield, Virginia. And I've been dabbling into Revolutionary War history since I grew up in upstate New York and in the Hudson Valley, and grew up with the culture of that, going to Fort Ticonderoga, and having the battlefields there and the forts there, and here in Virginia, my professional expertise bounced around from, museum work in the Civil War period to, I work at a 17th century site, but it's really come on to me through living history and also being a programs guy to illuminate this story of Arnold's raid on Richmond, but in more than that, just his presence in Virginia for those several months. And now through the 250th anniversary of the Revolution coming, the county that I work in is going to be illuminating all of those interactions between the armies and the communities. And it really has fallen on to me, and Mark probably knows this really well too, that there aren't very many people who are familiar with the idea that the revolution happened outside of Yorktown. And Richmond especially, and certainly having a high profile person like Benedict Arnold is definitely going to at least be brain candy for some people to dabble in. So, right now I'm in the middle of all of that, I think, as Mark is.
Yeah, well, thank you both for being here. And yeah, John, it's incredible how many people I meet that say that their colonial history passion began up in the Lake George, Lake Champlain region, because it certainly did for me as well, visiting those forts up there growing up. So to start us off tonight, provide context, can one of you give us a little brief background of the military situation in the South as 1780 is coming to a close? Were there British forces already operating in Virginia before Arnold even got there?
Go ahead, Mark. I know you're writing a book on some of this, so.
Yeah, well, 1780, of course, the British have decided to head south, and Charleston is going to fall in May, one of the, if not the largest American patriot surrenders of the war. And as John was saying, my friend Rob Orson and I have just finished writing a book on the Battle of Camden, which took place in August 16th of 1780. And it was just a disaster for American forces under Horatio Gates. And Gates's reputation, really, as a military leader, would be ruined at that point. Would never be able to recover. You've got a situation where, after the Battle of Camden, the largest Patriot forces operating are partisan forces, militia, under Thomas Sumter, Francis Marion, Andrew Pickens, and the like will pick up the mantle, and they are actually keeping the revolutionary, I guess, spirit alive down in South Carolina. And it's Lord Cornwallis it's a brilliant battle at Camden. He is his British forces there are absolutely superb, but it's going to prove to be the high watermark of the British incursions there in the South. And Cornwallis is going to be busy trying to push to the north, trying to roll up through North Carolina and then into Virginia. And Virginia is providing men, munitions for the American or Patriot Southern Department. And if the British can knock out Virginia, that's going to be a coup. They knock them out of the war. It's really going to maybe end the revolutionary spirit in what they called the colonies. We were calling the states at that point. And the partisan forces are just going to be a thorn in Cornwallis's side. He's going to lose his flank protections. He's got at Kings Mountain in October of 1780. Patrick Ferguson and his loyalist provincials are going to lose a big battle to Southern militia and the Over Mountain men from what we call now East Tennessee, the Watauga settlement. In January of 1781, Daniel Morgan is going to fight a brilliantly defensive action against the dreaded Bannister Tarleton at Cowpens. And Cornwallis, though, at that point he's picking up, he's packing up, he's going to move into North Carolina again, trying to get to Virginia and knock that colony out of the war. He's going to deal with the new Southern Department Commander Nathaniel Greene at Guilford Courthouse. And of course, the British, as we all know, is going to officially win that bout, but Cornwallis's troops are going to be mauled, and he's going to have to retreat back to Wilmington to regroup and refit, and finally move up into Virginia. And coming down south to take control of what's going to be the rebuilt Continental forces, who were almost decimated from Maryland, from Delaware, Camden, is going to be Nathaniel Greene, and he's going to ride through the new capital, Virginia, Richmond, with Baron von Steuben, who has just worked wonders at Valley Forge and really creating, in my opinion, the American Army in terms of their ability to drill and to move, maneuver. And von Steuben is anxious to stay by the side of Nathaniel Greene, but he is going to get the assignment to stay in Richmond, to stay in Virginia, set up a barracks, a depot to try to outfit, try to enlist battalions, brigades of Continental troops and send them south for the aid of Nathaniel Greene. So that's pretty much where we are. We're moving into 1781, and Virginia is not really prepared for war. They've moved their capital from Williamsburg to the small hamlet of Richmond, and by January 1781, it's still pretty much a small town. Not a lot of residents, not a lot of buildings. Thomas Jefferson is still the governor, and so what we're going to find out with Arnold's raid is that Virginia was woefully unprepared for the arrival of the British.
So why is Brigadier General Benedict Arnold ordered to take a 1,800 or so man expeditionary force to Virginia? What was his mission? And why now again is that focus shifting to the Commonwealth?
All right. So, it's interesting with Arnold because people forget that it wasn't even 3 months before he was a major general in the American Army. His commission to being a brigadier general launches him into a concept that the high command in New York has, which is, we want you to prove yourself. And we want you to prove yourself. In the meantime, we have this idea that General Greene's army is being supplied through Virginia, specifically the corridor between Richmond and Petersburg. So he will get that force that will ultimately be a mix of veterans and some newer troops, and leave that area around Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and New York, late December 1780. And when he comes down into Virginia and is moving his way up the James, his orders partly are known and partly are unfolded as the traveling commences. His principal orders are to disrupt communications and supplies between Virginia and General Greene's army. But there is this essence that here's Arnold, who is going to scare the pants off of the architect of the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson, and his governance of Virginia. There's a lot of things involved in this. We'll call it a raid. Remember, there are raids into the Chesapeake and Virginia before this. This one's going to come inland. This one's going to go deep. So it gives you a sense of that by the troops that are with him. We know that the fleet, of course, gets disrupted by a storm off the coast, and only half of his force is with him when he comes up the James. Fortunately for him, the best unit in his command, the Queen's Rangers of Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe, they're with him, as are some of Captain Johann Ewald's Jaegers, the 76th, 80th Regiments of Foot, and presumably some of Arnold's headquarters troops, the American Legion, which are part mounted and part on foot. But when he comes up the James, it's up to him to basically design the plan. And we know he is moving up with some loyalists and the Queen's Rangers who grew up in Tidewater, Virginia. They're in the lead ships. They're able to guide him to places. And when he arrives at Fort Hood, or Hood's Point Battery, and that is the night of January 4th, 1781, engages the militia there briefly. It is now set in motion the turn of events that will end in him being in Richmond. Jefferson's aware that Arnold's fleet has come around into the Chesapeake. By the second day of January, Jefferson's put out the call for militia and to find out where Arnold's going. So when he engages at Hood's Point, people now know he's moving upriver. What's his next stop going to be, Richmond or Petersburg? And now the militia is fanning out. And now Arnold's got to decide, which way on the river do I go? And on January 5th, he disembarks at Westover. And there, the rest will begin.
And guys, I think it's important to remember that when we think about Benedict Arnold, the first word that comes to mind is traitor. He is given this task, as John said. He's trying to prove himself, and it's an important task, but he's not fully trusted by the British High Command. Henry Clinton, in command of all British forces, is going to make sure that Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Dundas of the 80th Regiment keep an eye on Arnold, because they're not fully sure, they're not fully convinced that he has indeed changed his coat. And so they were keeping an eye on him and ready to assume command of this operation, this raid, if necessary.
Right. They received dormant commissions from Clinton, right, should Arnold be killed, or if he was just incapable of completing his mission. And Arnold obviously did not know about this. But I think optic-wise, too, it looks good for if the British are trying to persuade anybody else to come onto their side by giving Arnold, an active field commission like this and a brigadier generalship, because it looks like they're treating him very well after what he had just done. So they definitely think that that's on their mind as well, at least you can assume. So Arnold himself, one of the best soldiers in American history. What were some of, or give us a brief description kind of his service prior to this 1781 operation, and why is he now donning that scarlet red?
Well, of course, first he's going to be a part of the capture of Fort Ticonderoga with Ethan Allen. And Arnold has got, in my opinion, Arnold's got a big ego. He's got a big ego, but he does have a lot of talent. He is going to be part of the American operations trying to capture Montreal, Quebec. He's going to be severely wounded in the leg at Quebec. But then he'll also serve with distinction at Saratoga, even after being ordered off the field by Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, he called himself. but still would return and still lead his troops and wounded again in the same leg. And I firmly believe that had he not turned traitor, had he not made that decision, there would be a state named after him. There would be countless high schools and junior colleges named after Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, and I know people always say too, if had he been killed at Saratoga rather than just wounded, or even had he just gone unscathed, that he still would have gone down kind of in the pantheon of great American leaders and American heroes. I always like to say that Benedict Arnold, the American, did in fact die at Saratoga, because after receiving that wound, it really did precipitate that downward spiral towards treason.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Looking now at the other side, the Americans who are in Virginia, what kind of opposition is there to actually slow down or prevent Arnold from moving so inland?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That comes up a lot. And one of the things I often say is that you have to look at it and that there's a prism of two forces. There is the continental forces, there is the militia. The militia is commanded by Governor Jefferson. Any continental forces in Virginia are commanded by Steuben, right? But Jefferson is giving Steuben, and Steuben is careful with the politics of command. At times, Steuben will be commanding a force of Virginia militia and some continentals, but basically they entrust Steuben with a lot of the organizing of this defense of Virginia. The problem is the infrastructure and the chain of command doesn't allow him to quickly communicate with all these separate factions of the militia. The second that Arnold is passing up the peninsula, you have militia that is forming there, the lower militia of Virginia. And they've been quite active because of the recent raids the last few years. So they're on it. The problem is he just blows past them. And the question is, what's the militia like in the middle of Virginia around Richmond? And so now if you just think about what we'll call the Hanover, the Goochland, the Henrico County, New Kent, Chesterfield, Prince George County, all these counties are really going to be in the middle of this. They get called up pretty quickly. The problem is to define how long it takes in the middle of winter, especially in what is really around the holidays, time for these, especially officers in the militia, to gather effective forces in the field in the middle of winter holidays. And Arnold strikes perfectly. It takes the militia, usually in this campaign, somewhere about 2 days, in some places 3 days, to come under arms. And a lot of times what these officers are saying is that I've got 100 men who have turned out with their muskets, and I got 200 who have none. So now the militias are starting to segregate between the armed men and the unarmed men. What do we do with them? So when you look at that, yes, there was militia at Hood's Point Battery, but they're gone. They leave. At Westover, there's no militia anywhere in the ballpark. The force that was organizing, you have a couple of officers. Jefferson's going to organize the militia by Major Alexander Dick, who is basically a veteran of the Virginia State Marines. He's an effective officer. He's been on the oceans. He's been captured, prisoner of war in Britain, escaped. And he's the guy that's going to lead a mounted infantry force on horseback down the road from Richmond towards Westover. And that leaves other guys around Richmond, and that'll fall to the command of Colonel John Nicholas, who is basically acting as Jefferson's right-hand aide-de-camp in the field at this moment. So Major Alexander Dick will be actually the party that will be kind of ordered to slow Arnold's advance down. But where to do that? Well, they've been told, hey, Arnold's landing at Westover. All right, so what's a good spot? One of the choice spots will be 4 Mile Creek, several miles below Richmond. And that'll be a slowdown. There's a bridge. You slow those guys down. Whatever you do, slow them down so the militia can organize in the capital. Nicholas, however, is also tasked with removing all the stores and government records and munitions out of Richmond, and to see that Jefferson and his family are in safety. So Jefferson is commanding in the field while his family was in Richmond. That's a fun one to handle. Steuben is basically governing everything towards Petersburg, where the Continental stores are. So he's got Chesterfield Courthouse to Petersburg and is trying to effectively get all the stuff out of the way in case Arnold goes there. And in the meantime, trying to take these like half-clad, destitute Continentals at Chesterfield Barracks and see how many of them actually could take to the field, which in his writing says no more than 150. There's some Virginia State artillery floating around. There's some other troops, but there's two major interactions taking place in the militia command. Colonels and majors and these people, almost all of them, the vast majority, are former Continental veterans who can handle the troops and the organizing as soon as they get the men and the weapons. No problem. So on the eve of Arnold pretty much coming to Richmond, there's roughly 4,000 to 5,000 militia organizing. The problem is there's no more than probably 700 or 800 that are in the field ready to come after Arnold when he's marching on Richmond.
Okay. Yeah, not much. And as Mark was talking about, kind of a theme with this whole period is that Virginia just simply was not ready or prepared to actually oppose any kind of significant British force moving through the state. Now, back to Arnold. This in itself is an amphibious operation. You know, he's not marching men overland down to Virginia. He is taking them by ship, and he's going to be projecting that power from sea onto land in order to accomplish this mission. So for people who maybe aren't familiar with that part of Virginia or the James River in itself, is there going to be really any kind of significant obstacles when it comes to moving a force like this into the James River that you can think of at least?
Yeah. You want to handle that, Mark? You want me to?
Well, let's just both do that. I mean, it's,
Right.
And John, you may know more a little bit about this than I do. I'm thinking about Hood's Point right there at the mouth of the Appomattox River. That was supposed to be a huge obstacle. It was supposed to be a battery. It was supposed to be militia that should have been able to sweep anything coming up the river, and they just weren't ready and weren't able to stand against the British, and there wasn't much opposition there. But as far as bringing craft up the river, there really wasn't any obstacles that I can think of.
Correct. Yes. So the Virginia State Navy at this point is hiding. They pretty much are. There's two places they usually went, to the upper Pamunkey or farther up in the Chickahominy, or in later 1781, they get trapped at Osborne's Landing. So they're not really willing to engage with Arnold's fleet. So Arnold has a free pass to pretty much dock where he wants. But the other part of this that comes up is when Arnold is considering where to bring his fleet in to disembark, he knows that since he has a price on his head, that he does not want to be in the field in terms of miles or time longer than a couple of days march from his ships. It's what I call the Lexington and Concord factor. The more that he and his force gets away from their base of supplies or ships, the more they feel that several thousand Americans with guns are going to surround them and pick them off on the way back. So if we look at the logistics and the smartness that is Arnold, he picks the one logical place, Westover. You can go into the idea of who lives there and Arnold's relations, which, Mark, I don't know if you want to touch on that in a few seconds, but when Arnold gets to Westover, he knows clearly that if his guys, by the way, are on ships for what, 2.5, 3 weeks. And I want you to imagine being on that ship, and then your officer is Benedict Arnold, not your just like paper pushing officer. We're talking one of the most driven military figures in that period, who is like, you guys were on this ship for 3 weeks, but you know what? I want you to get off without much rest and do forced marches, attack the Virginia capital, destroy everything there, and get me back safely to my base of supplies. And Arnold knew that Westover was at the most 2 days march, and that was about it. The question is, could his troops pull off the raid, win, and get back safely in that amount of time?
And also remember that, John, you made a great point that Arnold had a price on his head. He couldn't afford to linger too long anywhere. He couldn't afford a pitched battle, so to speak, because if he's taken, there's nothing more than George Washington would have wanted than to have Benedict Arnold at the end of a rope. So it's going to be a lightning raid, absolutely. And he's going to select Westover because he's got a family connection as far as Mrs. Arnold is concerned. She's actually a cousin, I believe, to the lady of the house. The Byrd family live at Westover. And so you've got a nice connection there. And just a plug for historic Westover Plantation. There's a family who lives there, been over 100 years. They've been still farming at Westover Plantation. The house and grounds are open. Come out and take a tour. It's fantastic, but they do talk quite a bit about this. And there's one story that the family tells is that when Arnold arrives, he's going to use property of the Byrds in terms of maybe draft animals, maybe some wagons, and what maybe the Byrd family would have considered property enslaved people. And Mrs. Byrd is agreeable to allow him to use that property, but she also wants that property back, and she will get a little nervous. Want to make sure she's going to get it back, and she's going to write a letter to General Arnold asking when she's going to get those things back, the property back. And that letter is intercepted by, I guess, Patriot forces. And so she's got a lot of splaining to do, right? And so they tell the story that Benedict Arnold actually comes into the house on the way back, and he'll take his saber and whack the banister of the house just to kind of give the impression that he didn't do any favors to this house. They were not in partnership or in league, that he actually treated it very roughly, so to try to get her off the hook. But Westover is only about maybe 25 miles or so from Richmond. And with the landing of Westover, I've always, I believe that Jefferson thought that his target was going to be Williamsburg. A bunch of Stuyvesant's thinking maybe Petersburg, as John said. And I always like to say that when he finds out that the British forces have landed at Westover, I always felt that Thomas Jefferson got caught watching the paint dry. And now it's hurry up, get this done, get the public stores, get the public papers, get everything out. And once they got that into motion, I think they did a fairly good job. Not everything could be moved, of course. But as John said, Jefferson was in the field sending his family downriver down to Tuckahoe Plantation, where he's going to join them later. And but Westover is just a really ideal spot. Deep water right there, a wide portion of the river to be able to land. You've got that connection, a good base of operations.
So after landing at Westover, now his next stop is going to be Richmond. Now, you had mentioned, Mark, how Richmond was a very small hamlet at the time, really not much of a capital as we would think today. But why was it deemed such a necessary military target for Arnold's force?
Yeah, I think because you've only got about maybe less than 1,000 residents there. It's been maybe 300 buildings. You've got it's been the capital of Virginia for less than a year. But again, I think knocking that capital out, helping to knock that state out of the revolutionary cause in terms of stopping any type of munitions, any type of manpower that's being sent down to Greene's army in South Carolina, I think is crucial for the British war effort.
Yeah. So it's interesting, Richmond as a target. There's a lot of things to think about, and landing at Westover, it probably was on Arnold's mind too. There's symbolic things like right up the road, next door neighbors is one of the signers of the Declaration, the Harrisons, going to Richmond, the capital, and throwing it, out of, just they're going to run for their lives to Charlottesville, all these things. But one of the things that really is going on around Richmond is that, again, it's the center of the military affairs of Virginia to Greene's army. So it shakes that up right away. But outside of town is this place called the Weston Laboratories and Foundry, right? And it's a pretty effective place and was actually going for, a few years, to the point where if you take that out, it has a lot of stuff that Greene's army really needs. All right, so there's that. So it is almost every factor involved in this, but remember, time is of the essence. So when when you're moving your, 800 to 900 men, up that road, what is it, maybe 28 miles, in square numbers, usually the Queen's Rangers probably could have done that in a day in any other campaign, but these guys are ship stiff, and the weather is terrible, and it will be the whole week. So when they're marching up, and now they're seen, they're actually spotted by an officer who is now going to send word up the road towards Richmond. And now Major Alexander Dick is going to take up that position at 4 Mile Creek, which is just outside of Richmond, mostly halfway down the road. But Arnold's forces are making their way to 4 Mile Creek. Most of them don't know what's ahead of them. There's some Virginians in the Queen's Rangers, but most are like, we just know Richmond's somewhere up that road. And almost all the bridges that are in their way are plank bridges. So anywhere you can basically occupy, if you're the militia, pull up the planks of a bridge, you slow that force down for hours, if not for an overnight. So 4 Mile Creek was a good selection. The only thing is, it's debated on this, is that Major Alexander Dick was apparently told to engage Arnold there. He chose to pull the planks of the bridge and scamper back to Richmond. And, when Arnold gets to 4 Mile Creek after leaving Westover at I think after 11 in the morning on January 4th, they stop at 4 Mile Creek because there's no bridge to cross. And someone the other day was asking me, why wouldn't they just wade through 4 Mile Creek? And I said, well, why don't you go try it and see what happens. So they're exhausted. So they bivouac there for, 3 or 4 hours, whatever it is. And then the next day they're starting to move towards Richmond. Dick is kind of an interesting guy because he's got these mounted guys mostly. He goes back to Richmond, and I think he thought there would be a bigger force assembled there, and he was going to augment those troops all together atop Richmond and on those heights. And if there was several hundred troops up there waiting, it might have been a more effective battle. So Arnold is basically going to, on the morning of January 5th, march towards Richmond. The Queen's Rangers, those Jaegers, 76th, 80th Regiment of Foot, and he's approaching the town, and of course, there you have the militia waiting on top of those heights. The question is, what's Arnold going to do? What are the militia going to do? And while that's going on, Steuben and Jefferson are on the other side of the river watching from Manchester. And there's other militia forces starting to converge, but they're still a day away. So that brings us to the skirmish, the Battle of Richmond.
Yeah, so now as Arnold's forces there, paint us a picture of what happens next, because as you said, it does begin with a skirmish there on Church Hill.
Well, they called it Richmond Hill at the time, and you've got about 200 or so, maybe Henrico militiamen, Henrico County really surrounding the city. These are not well-trained men. These are not well-provisioned men. And there may have been some who had done some militia duty. In fact, most of them had, but I'm not sure what their combat readiness or combat experience really would have been like. And, Arnold's forces are coming down what was called the Williamsburg Road, really moving into our modern main streets, as a matter of fact. And we do have a nice first-hand account from Captain Johann Ewald, the commander of the German Jaeger Corps. It's part of our Chimborazo source file, put together by my good friend and co-worker Mike Gorman. Give him a good shout out here. But Ewald talks about coming in. There's a force on a hill with some timber at the bottom there to their right. Arnold sees that, and Ewald says he comes up to him and says something along the lines of, "This looks like a job for you." And so the Jaegers are going to deploy. They're going to head up the hill. And Ewald's going to tell us that the local militiamen are going to fire a ragged volley, one ragged volley. One Jaeger's going to be wounded. A couple more are going to venture a little bit too far to the right. They will be captured. But after that, the militia are done. They fire their one shot, and then they turn tail. They run a gorge, across a gorge and into the woods. That gorge is called Bloody Run, we know today. But it's, of course, this is all the site of by the 1860s is the site of Chimborazo Hospital along that wide hilltop there. The Jaegers are going to be joined by some of the cavalry of the Queen's Rangers. And there's an interesting story down on Main Street as the rest of Arnold's forces are coming in, the 80th and so forth. You've got the old stone house. Now it's currently occupied. It's the Edgar Allan Poe Museum, but it's considered the oldest stone dwelling in Richmond, going back to maybe even before the beginning of it, maybe to the 17th century. But a book came out later in the 19th century, and there was a woman who her name was Elizabeth. I've got this written down. Elizabeth Welsh, writing about her mother, whose name was Elizabeth Eggy. She and her husband Samuel Eggy lived in the stone house, and that family had a story, a family connection, that they said that Elizabeth Eggy remembered looking east along Main Street and seeing cavalry riding up and down Richmond Hill. She thought they made a proper site, but it's a firsthand account of someone who actually saw Arnold's forces coming in. So as far as the Battle of Richmond, that's pretty much about it in a nutshell. Just some token resistance and the militia filet.
And it's that same day that after Richmond is occupied by Arnold, then I think it's Simcoe goes off towards the Foundry to destroy or take whatever he could there, correct?
Yeah, it's going to be Simcoe and Ewald, and a few members of the 80th Regiment are going to march those 6 miles down to where the Foundry is. It's right now, it's in the vicinity of the neighborhood of Windsor Farms, and that part of the river, actually. And they're going to go down, and Ewald's going to give us a pretty clear account of what they do to the Foundry in terms of building that, dumping barrels of gunpowder into the river, spoiling as many munitions as possible, and even getting into some local houses and appropriating some ale, some beer, some rum. So a lot of these guys are going to get feeling no pain while they're doing that.
Yeah, I think on the march back to Richmond, Ewald said that his men were so drunk and noisy that they could be heard from 2 hours away.
Yeah, it's really interesting with that part of things, because that force going to Westham was being bird dogged by the Chesterfield militia, and actually some Continentals were directly across from them on the south side of the James. They had removed all the ferry boats from Britain's Ferry, which is not too far above that. But they were pretty much being watched, and the idea was if they're going to cross the James, we're going to be ready for them. That was Steuben's and the militia's role over there, was to make sure that did not happen. One of the things I really find interesting is that they're pulling back into Richmond, and if they would have continued marching, another 10 miles or so, they would have been right on Jefferson's family, which they wouldn't have known that. But the other part of this that's really interesting is that Jefferson's chief military officer, Colonel John Nicholas, when he got Jefferson squared away, he was also tasked with organizing all the militia that were coming across at the Tuckahoe Ferry, and also from Goochland and points west and western Henrico, and they were all organizing on Tuckahoe Creek, right across the bridge in what's now Goochland County. It's right where the Tuckahoe Ferry and the River Road all meet. And that force was pretty big. And that's where Nicholas has actually loaned Continentals from General Steuben. It was about 50 or 60 veteran Continentals, not even the new recruits that were at Chesterfield, but these are some of the guys that were waiting to go home that had seen service for 2 or 3 years. The commander of those guys was Captain Woodson, who actually didn't live too far away. And I'm sure that he had some ideas of get backs against Arnold. The question is in what capacity? So here you have a force of 1 full company of Continental veterans and a few hundred militia under Colonel Nicholas. And what we know happens is one of the more intriguing events in this storyline, which is the attack of Arnold's outpost on the suburbs of Richmond the morning of January 6th. which Colonel Nicholas in his pension will refer to as the fight at Scuffletown. So that is an interesting fight because apparently they did drive in Arnold's outposts, and we know that Arnold was in a hurry. I'm going to get back to Westover, and I think that this really aggressive officer corps of Nicholas and Woodson made it seem like maybe there were thousands of militia in the nighttime, the morning darkness, now pushing in his pickets. And I bet you the order came quick that, all right, drunken guys, we need to get out of Richmond.
No, I think you're exactly right. And again, this is supposed to be a lightning raid, which it pretty much was. And the call for the county militias to muster from Jefferson goes out late, but it still goes out. And time is of the essence for Arnold here, because the longer he waits, the bigger the force is gathering against him.
Yep. So we move into the next day, January 6th. Arnold spends the night in Richmond, and then that day, he's going to give it is an ultimatum in any sense to Jefferson to essentially have everybody load up all these supplies onto the Royal Navy ships, and I'll even give you a half price for them too. It sounds like a pretty good deal, and I know a lot of the merchants in town were considering that, hey, this might be our best way out of it. And
Yeah,
add on to that.
So we know Jefferson's reply to that, which is you can go take your tobacco and you know what to do with it. And Jefferson had it's interesting that the people forget that tobacco is being secured by Virginia from the planters to finance trade and supply through the Caribbean for its Virginia troops. So when we're talking about the destruction of tobacco, it's not just the privately owned stuff, it's the stuff that Virginia is purchasing to use in its commodities for exchange to supply its war effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. But as you said, Jefferson totally shoots down this offer from Arnold, and that's when Arnold then begins ordering his men to take some of these military targets, but things start to get out of hand, and some sacking of the city begins, as well as a lot of buildings are put to the torch. So go into a little detail about how things kind of got out of hand there.
Well, he loads up about 42 of these small craft with commodities, with tobacco, with rum, that kind of thing, anything that he could sell for cash money, and sends it on down the river. But he destroys the rope walk there, Rocket's Landing, shipbuilding warehouses, as many public buildings as he can get his hands on. He's given Jefferson and the people of Richmond the opportunity to save their city if they just first A, stop shooting at us, and B, just give us what we want and we'll go on about our business. And Jefferson had no choice but to not cave into that. And Arnold is most likely infuriated by that. So he's just a brand new capital, and it's really getting sacked. It's going to be burned. What I've always found interesting is he misses what's called the old Capitol building. The Virginia Assembly had not really agreed upon where the new state capitol was going to be, the building itself. And so they're meeting in a confiscated warehouse. And it turns out that it's a British-owned company. The Williams Cunningham and Company owned this property. And therefore, since they were Tories, they were loyalists, it's left undestroyed. It turns out there are public documents still there. There's a lot of public items in there that Arnold could have destroyed, but he actually misses that. It's right around 14th Street or so, 14th and Main, that area, and Cary rather.
Okay. So Arnold's just laid waste to Richmond. Now he's going to turn around and head towards Westover. Does he get there safely? Does the Continental Militia, or Virginia Militia, begin to harass him? Or what transpires next?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm gonna ask Mark, because I think he's got Mark. I don't know if you have Evol's journal or anything near you, but he between Simcoe and Captain Evald, they leave us these really good accounts, right? And we know that Arnold backtracks to 4 Mile Creek, pauses there, does an overnight again, and then the next day we'll get back to Westover. John Graves Simcoe is going to have a reference in his writings that talks about that march being one of the worst marches that that unit had seen in the entire war, which is saying a lot when you're considering the Queen's Rangers history. I think he referred to the road as basically the rain pouring down, the trees overhanging, the smallness of the road, and that the country people were coming after his stragglers that disappeared on that march. And of course, they do get back on January 7th. One thing that I thought interesting, I think it's Evald that wrote that the amount of men they lost on that trek is a little higher than I think Simcoe or some others would give credit for. Mark, I don't know if you have that reference. I just don't have it in front of me.
I don't have it in front of me either, but the British, of course, that was par for the course in terms of underscoring the true amount of loss, that kind of thing. But John, you made a great point earlier on that it was reminiscent of the British raided Lexington and Concord in terms of the hell these guys went through trying to just get back to safety, get back, in that case, to Boston, get back to Westover now. And
Simcoe's mentioning of the rainstorm, the weather. I think it was soon to be Governor Nelson. Nelson was commanding a large force of the lower militia, the peninsula. And he had gathered, I believe, several hundred militia at Holt's Forge, which I think today is Providence Forge area in that neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And he basically said, I believe, in his writings that his force had organized. They basically gathered the several hundred of the best armed men and were waiting to cut down the peninsula and cut Arnold off from Westover. When the storm comes in, and I believe in his letter says basically flooded his militia out. And what were they living in? What was the militia actually living in? Basically brush huts. They had no canvas to sleep under, so they were sleeping in these, branching cabins that they threw up to, and here comes this rainstorm in the middle of January and essentially took this effective strike force that was going to come down on Arnold's left flank. And basically that opportunity went by the wayside.
So once they get to Westover now, Arnold's going to determine to then go to Portsmouth, where he'll fortify and establish that kind of base of operations along the shoreline there. There are several skirmishes on the way back towards Portsmouth. So I know the militia does start or try to get in the way of him by this point, correct?
Yes. So one of the more interesting skirmishes is the January 8th skirmish at Charles City Courthouse. This is the militias had pretty much started to pinch in towards Westover, and Arnold was nervous that they were getting too close. The job fell to the Queen's Rangers, and specifically the Hussars, which is the mounted portion of the Queen's Rangers. And they struck out from their camps in the evening of January 8th, did what they did on a bunch of different campaigns. They would simply go up to the militia wearing their green jackets and just be like, do you see any redcoats around here? And none of the militia know the Queen's Rangers uniforms are the enemy. So they would simply just capture the pickets. And once they did that, at Charles City Courthouse, it's dark. Here's this, force of 40 or 50 Queen's Rangers. And now they're just charging with horns blaring into the camps at Charles City Courthouse. Must have seemed like thousands of the enemy were attacking the militia there. And they basically chased them out. In fact, some of those militiamen went into the tavern, the courthouse, for shelter. There's stories about that you could still see blood stains on the tavern and the courthouse inside for years. There were several militia killed by those swords in that fight. And it basically pushed out the buffer zone a little bit for Arnold's guys at Westover. And of course, when he retreats from Westover, again, they're what's on the right, what's on the left on the James, and they go to shore. There's some militia force. Let's push them back. Here's a militia force. Let's push them back. And then they get to Portsmouth. They fortify, and then it starts the new chapter in this campaign.
So, in your opinion, I think you could probably agree that for Arnold, this was a fantastic debut. Donning that new coat of the British Army, because once he gets back to Portsmouth, the campaign really comes to an end. So, what really are the consequences, immediate consequences or long-standing consequences of this campaign?
Mark, you have a better global brain than I do.
I mean, I think it's sort of a wake up call for Virginia, just how woefully unprepared they were. The fact that they moved their capital so far inland, and that still wasn't safe enough. Baron von Steuben is going to be working hard to continue his job, to try to continue to outfit Continental brigades to send south, and he is really going to become disgusted with Virginia politicians, Richmond politicians, in terms of kind of getting in his way of doing his job. I think it's going to strike fear into the hearts of Richmonders and Virginians that they really were not safe, that this man could just come right into their capital, and it's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face to have the capital of Virginia Arnold just did whatever he wanted to do at will. Came in, burned it, left. So it just really showcased the fact that Virginia just really didn't have a lot of defenses here.
Yeah, and you think that kind of squarely can also be placed on definitely the shoulders of Thomas Jefferson.
Absolutely.
At this point, not a great period of his governorship there. So we're going to have to bring you both back for another revelry discussion on the second part of Arnold's frolic through Virginia, the springtime operations that do occur around Petersburg, such. But briefly describe, for those who don't know, what role does Arnold later go on to play that springtime in Virginia once William Phillips arrives with reinforcements and assumes command in March? Does he lead men on the battlefield down there again?
Yeah. So, yeah, we pretty much see that Arnold does what he's supposed to do, and also hold a presence in Virginia by his base of supplies at Portsmouth, setting the stage for whatever is coming next, which we know what happens. General Phillips, he's going to arrive in Virginia in March of 81, and then everything kind of goes forward from there. But something that really happens that I think is interesting is the Virginia veteran officers that are like, man, we really got it handed to us in January. Guys like Muhlenberg or Colonel Parker, and these guys that are commanding the militia opposing Arnold. Somebody called it the Corps of Observation. They're simply encircling Arnold while he's at Portsmouth, but they just don't do that. What Muhlenberg does, he takes all these militia units and he gives almost all of the commanders and the troops a chance to skirmish with Arnold's outpost at Portsmouth, so they gain valuable battlefield experience, sensing that this campaign is going to pick up and the militia is going to have to bear the brunt, and they have to know what it's like to smell burning powder. And I think once you have Arnold in juncture with Phillips, I always thought that conversation would be interesting because Phillips, of course, is captured at Saratoga, and he has to now talk to Arnold, who was responsible for his imprisonment. But they seem to work well together. Phillips is the army commander, and Arnold's certainly with Phillips going to be a good wing commander. Phillips will take command of the army. Hey, Arnold, here, I need you to command half of it and go do this. And that's what the spring campaign will basically be until Phillips, dies at Petersburg.
Great, excellent. So we are approaching the hour mark now. So I have two last questions to ask you. The first one is, what sites other than, say, Westover, that are associated with Arnold's expedition can our viewers still visit today, even if it's just a simple interpretive marker along the road?
Well, certainly you can come to Chimborazo Park Medical Museum. There are some historic markers there. Just down the road from us, on 25th and Broad Street, is historic St. John's Church, where a good many of Arnold's troops bivouacked on the night of the 5th. And also, as I mentioned, down on around 14th, and I believe it's maybe Cary, there's a nice marker where that the old Capitol building was. And we do have, if you can stop in at Chimborazo, if you want to come in, we've got some nice brochures on Arnold's raid with some area maps and to see what was there, what was still there. Galt's Tavern at 19th and Main Street is unfortunately a kind of an empty lot there, but it's kind of nice to be in the space where Arnold made his headquarters during the battle. So there's still a few places around.
Mark,
and then John, talk a little bit about the marker out there near Scuffletown.
Yeah, yeah. The marker. So there is a marker at the intersection of Grove and Robinson in the Fan of Richmond. It was put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution in the 1850s. I want to say the 1850s. And it's interesting because it says on this spot, Colonel Nicholas drove in Arnold's picket line. The really interesting thing is that they got the date wrong. It says January 4th, 1781. Yeah. But it's really neat that that's there. And, there's other locations that, it's like you kind of have to have your imagination there because there's no interpretive way signs.
Yeah.
The spot where Colonel Nicholas gathered his militia and troops to go march towards Richmond on the morning of the 6th, I think is actually a church in a religious campus on River Road, west of Richmond. And I want to talk to them in the future to see if they'd be interested in putting a marker there for the 250th. So, but yeah, anything. I mean, right now there's a lot of spots you have to use your imagination, but I think when we go through the 250th, we have a chance to maybe interpret the places a little better, I think.
Yeah, and it's a very important aspect of that as well.
Yeah, the 250th coming up is going to definitely provide a lot of opportunity for these stories that typically aren't told to be told and gain some attention. Now, somebody in the chat said that you two should collaborate and write a book about this. So sticking along the subject of books, do you have any recommended reading or favorite books that are either focus on this subject or briefly cover it?
Yeah, I do actually. It's Richmond during the Revolution, 1775 to 1783. It might be kind of let me get it up here so people can see it. It might be difficult to even find today. It was actually, I think, first printed back in the 70s. But this is a great book on early Richmond and the events surrounding Arnold's raid. So I definitely do. You can still find it. I definitely do recommend it.
Yeah, and if people want to get John Gray Simcoe's journal, you can get a variety of places. You can get a soft pack version at a vendor, Jazz Townsend's website, TOWNSEND. He offers it there for it's a really inexpensive price. And I would say if you're reading the Queen's Rangers journal there by Simcoe, I mean, you have a lot of the material. I know Ewald's book is out of print. It's expensive, but if you have the money to get that one, it's well worth it for all the campaign information, actually.
All right. Well, thank you both for sharing the story with us tonight. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. We will be back in 2 weeks from tonight on March 19th for another Revelry. That will be a pre-recorded discussion with Eric Sterner on his upcoming book, The Battle of Upper Sandusky, 1782. And there are still tickets available for our bus tour coming up around Charleston and Veterans Day weekend in November. You can find a link to purchase tickets for that on our Facebook page, as well as on our blog, emergingrevolutionaryaward.org. So I want to thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.